Welcome back to this introductory series. This is the second video in the series where we are going to start talking about setting up some of the systems. And if you haven't watched the first video is just a short overview of the organizational structure of program using the game feature plugins to modularize the code. Now we're going to talk about enabling Epic Online services and launching the game using that. I realized there was an important step that I skipped in the first chapter. So before we jump into EOS, the next thing to talk about is version control. So for this project, I've elected to use the Azure DevOps as my repository. So as I'm making changes, I'm pushing them to Azure as a DevOps instead of GitHub, largely because of their support of large file sizes. And as you get large file sizes, GitHub seems to have a few issues with large file formats that Azure DevOps seems to support better. I'm also using the GitHub desktop to manage my commits and pushes up to the repository. So two other things that I had set up, the GitHub desktop and the Azure DevOps repository. There are YouTube links out there. You can just search on Google and figure out how to set those up. But important that you have a version control system set up. All right, on to enabling Epic Online services. So the Lyra project comes with the Epic Online services embedded but not enabled. So when you do download the starter project, all the information you have is in the starter project. Just by default, it's not on. There's a great document available on the Unreal site. I've got a link to it here on the screen. Basically, all you're going to do is follow it step by step. I'm not going to make a video for that. It's very detailed. It tells you every step you need to do. I followed it. If you follow it precisely, you shouldn't have any problems getting your game up and running on the with the services. There are a couple of things that you should be aware of. One, you need to have two Epic accounts. So you probably have one already, which is your main, we'll call it your primary Epic account. You'll need to create a second account so that you can test with two different accounts if you're going to test multiplayer. So you'll probably want to set up a second Epic account that you just use for testing. You'll want to make sure that you've linked your primary Epic account with GitHub and be able to get the engine build off of GitHub, because you're going to need an engine build in order to do this. You're going to need Visual Studios. So if you have Visual Studio already installed, you're good there. Otherwise, you'll have to follow the steps to get that installed. Then you need a source build from GitHub to pull that down. And then you'll link your Epic Online Services account to your Epic account. So there's, again, steps for that. You can follow that. And then finally, you download the developer authentication tool, which is basically just your local authenticator for testing. Basically emulates the use of Epic Online Services before you have a fully published game. So when you've done all of that, you'll basically have your devepicgames.com portal, which I have a screenshot next. And you'll see here I have two projects. I had an old one called Souls, which is not configured and set up. And then I have the new one, which we're working on with this project. And if you go into your dashboard, you can then click on your Epic account services, which is highlighted here in green. And you should see that your permissions are configured and your linked clients are configured. So you don't need brand settings, but you do need the permissions set up properly and linked clients. And again, the documentation will walk you through all the steps necessary to do that. You'll then copy a key, which is why I'm not going into those pages. You'll copy some keys off of that, put them in your INI files in the appropriate space, and then you should be good to go. So that's setting up EOS on the server side. Then when you want to start testing or you want to start your game up, you need to do a couple of things. You need to start your EOS authentication tool on your PC, load up Visual Studios in your project, and then basically launch your game via Visual Studio, or you alternatively could do a batch file if you wanted to. And just a caution, the very first time you do this, you'll likely have to wait for shaders to compile, because I believe it sets that up in a different folder directory, so it's got to compile shaders again. All right, so let's walk through those steps. I just named the folder under my projects, which just sits right next to this project, EOS Dev Authentication Tool. If you go into that folder, you'll see the executable of the same name. You'll click on that executable, which will launch this pop-up web page browser container. The port number of 46 is the default, so you can just hit start. And you'll see in the first screen, then you'll have your local host in the upper left corner, but you won't have any credentials yet. You'll then hit login. You'll type in your email address and password that you use for Epic. So it's your email address and password that you use for Epic. It'll then pop up this middle window, and you can actually name. So the hi Rukel is being pulled from my Epic account. And then I can type in the name of my credentials, like player 1, player 2, George, Bob, whatever I want. And when you hit add, you'll get your credentials. So you'll see my credential over on the far right. I just named it the same as my username to keep things consistent. And then you're up and running on your desktop with your authentication running once you see that. If I needed to do 2 users, I would log in again, type in the second username and password, and then I would end up with 2 of these credentials side by side on the screen. Next, you go into Visual Studio, and you need to type in this series. So it's -game, so that when you hit play, it launches in a full game mode, not editor mode. You want to pick up your custom configuration, which is EOS, and you'll have known that from the other documentation. You're going to authenticate through the local host, which is what we just set up a few minutes ago. Your authentication password is your username, the name you typed in when you connected on that. And then you're authenticating with a developer type. So once you type all that in, and it's very fussy, I actually had a misplaced period at the end of the sentence, and it wasn't launching, and I was getting failures. And it took me a while to figure it out, but just make sure that that string is right. And then when you hit the play button, it should launch in its own window. So you'll end up with your game running. And if everything goes well, you should see this screen, and you'll notice in the bottom left, my name, my authentication, my EOS authentication. So I know that I'm logged in appropriately. And then when I play something, such as turn off bots, such as control, just a fast one to load up. And then if I hold the tab key, you'll note that my player name is my Epic Online Services name. So I'm effectively in the game, authenticated through EOS, and my player name and everything is taken care of. So now our project is up and running. We've got EOS set up, so we can start to use some of their capabilities and services in future videos. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you were able to set yours up effectively, and then we'll start diving into some of the other chapters. Thanks for watching.